So since you've done the reading questions about layouts and you finished Lockbox, it is time for us to do a type along with work on layouts. So I want to talk about the four types of layouts, and that's flow, grid, border, and card layouts. And first, let me show you what this type along is going to look like when we're done. So Java C, it's called FourLayouts. Java FourLayouts. So first of all, in the kind of big grid, the big panel, it's a 2x2 grid layout. So there are 2 rows and there are 2 columns, so it's 2x2. And then on the upper left-hand corner, we've got a flow layout where the buttons are flowing from left to right. In the upper right-hand corner, this is another grid layout where there are 4 rows and 1 column. And then the lower left, we have what is called a border layout. And then on the lower right, we have a card layout where I've got a button on top, and then a J panel, another button, and back to the top button. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you go to my website and you copy and paste the FourLayouts link that I have there. That's where we're going to start, and then we're going to fill it in, and then you're going to turn it in. You're going to submit your code to my Google Classroom. I'd also like to talk just for a moment about what we're going to be doing, kind of how we're thinking of this. So the J frame is one big frame. Right? We start with the J frame, and then inside the J frame is the big panel, and that's going to be a 2x2 grid layout. And then inside that, on the upper left, we're going to have one of the frames, and that is going to be our flow layout. And then on the right hand side, we'll have another one, and that's going to be another grid layout. Lower left is going to be a border layout, and then the last one on the right is going to be a card layout. So that's kind of how things are nested one inside the other. So let's take a look at the code, and first thing you want to do with the starter set that I've given you is you want to compile it and run it and just see what it looks like. So it should compile and run, and you just get a big gray picture. It has a title up at the top, but not much else. So let's start filling some things in. Maybe take a quick look at the code. I've got everything that you'll need up at the top here. Nothing that needs to change. You start out with a big frame, as I just showed you graphically, and you're going to put the big panel in it. And then in that big panel, we're going to put a flow panel in the upper left, a grid panel second, border panel comes lower left, card panel is lower right. And then each of those is set up. So the flow panel I have set up so that we can add some buttons. That's why we're implementing Action Listener. Grid panel will add some buttons. That's why I have the Action Listener. The border panel will have some buttons, again, an Action Listener. And then the card panel is going to be a little bit more complicated. We're going to have some panels and some buttons that we'll add. So I've set up the mouse listener, etc. So we've got to fill in the code so it's going to work. So the first thing for the big panel, we want to split that up into a 2x2 grid layout. So we say set layout. And again, you're going to want to follow along with me. So you want to type up the code. You might want to put the video on one side and then put your code on the right so that you can follow along, or maybe one above the other. This is a new grid layout. And it's going to be 2 rows and 2 columns. And then you can also include horizontal and vertical pixel gaps. So we're going to do that. And then for each of these fields that are set up, we want to create the panels here. So we're going to say flow equals new flow panel. And then we'll just add flow. And each of these have distinctive backgrounds, black and white, etc., so that they should show up when we get them to load. And then there are 4 of them, so I'll just copy and paste. 1, 2, 3 more. And the next one's going to be the grid. So we'll change it to grid. Next one's going to be a border. We'll change it to a border. Next one is a card. change it to a card. And then we're going to have the flow panel, and then the grid panel is next. And then the border panel is third. And then the card panel is last. Okay, so we set the grid layout, and we're going to add those in order. And let's see what that looks like. There we go. So the layouts are not what we want yet. This will be flow, grid, border down here, and then the card layout. But at least I can kind of see those as they have been constructed. Now let's work on the flow layout. So if we're going to set up remember for the grid layout, we had to say set layout to grid layout. Now, down here, we're going to say set layout, and that'll be a new flow layout. And then let's just add some buttons so that they will flow. And I don't want to spend too much time on the buttons, but it's going to be J button, and we'll just call it 1 equals new J button. And then we'll title it ONE for 1. And then we're going to add a listener, so 1.add action listener, so we can press it. This, and then we'll say to this particular layout, we're going to add to it, and so we're just going to say add 1. So we compile it, rerun it, and there you can see the button. That doesn't do anything because my method that would react to it, action perform, doesn't even look for it. But I would say 1, and then I would somehow do something. And I'm not going to spend my time talking about the buttons here. We're talking about the layouts. That'll be the next video where we talk about some of the components. All right, let's put some other buttons in there so we can see how they flow in. So I'm going to create 5 of them. So just 2, 3, 4 more, and I'll just call them 2. 3. You can call them whatever you want, but I'm just going to number them. The next one will be 4. The last one will be 5, and then we'll name them appropriately. And feel free to pause the video when you think you need to do that to follow along. All right, there we go. Recompile, rerun. Okay, and you can see that they're just flowing from left to right, right? When one was all by itself, it was right in the middle, but they get pushed in, and then when there's not enough room, it just flows into the next one. Another thing we can do is with flow layout, and you probably want to look up the API for flow layout, so you can go to Java flow layout API, Google, and check it out. But I can say, for example, flow layout dot left, so we can flow from the left, and then maybe we can do 80 pixels in, and then on the next line it might be 50 pixels down, something like that. So try that again. Okay, so you can see that it starts 80 pixels in from the left, and then 40 pixels down. When there's not enough room, it goes, or 50, I think, and then 50 down again. I could also flow from the right if I wanted to. There are other constants you can add as well. I think 50 is a little too big, so make it fit a little better. Maybe I'll do 40. Try it again. All right, and you can do, just you're flowing those buttons in. So that's our first example. Let's see. The next example is going to be a grid layout in the grid panel. So that'll be on the upper right. So we'll set the layout to a new grid layout. And this one will have 4 rows and 1 column, and then a little gap between each of the components. And then we'll lay down 4 buttons. So I think I'll just copy the buttons from above. Paste them in. Maybe let's rename them a little bit. Maybe let's call them first. You don't have to rename them because they're in different classes. But I'll just call them first, second, third, and fourth. Of course, we'll name them appropriately. So 1 ST for first, 2 ND for second, 3 RD for third, 4 TH for fourth. And then we might react to them somehow. Maybe if the user presses third, again, we would do something. I'm not worried about what that might be in this case because I'm talking about the layouts, not the components so much this time. So let's see what that looks like. There we go. You can see them line up. 4 rows and 1 column. I could maybe switch that around. How about 1 row and 4 columns? What does that look like? Okay, 4 rows, 1 column. I think I'll go back to the 4 rows and 1 column instead of 1 row and 4 columns. But there's my second example, so you could follow that as a way to set up your grid layout. Next, let's do a border layout. So with a border layout, you would say set layout and new border layout. So we set that up. And then with the border layout, you can also put gaps between. So I typically like to see the background. So maybe 10 and 10 again. Or you can make it with no arcs, which is fine. And then let's put some buttons in. So let's put in a button in the north first. This is on the border. So add a button in. We'll call it north. We'll even put the string north up at the top. When you do add, though, for a border layout, you have to say add, and then whatever your component is, and then you need to say border layout dot, and then either north, east, south, west, or center. And so we'll want this in the north. So there's an extra argument that you need to include for your add method when you're adding it to the panel. So, and then we might react to it, and then we would do something. Talk about that maybe at a later date, what that might be. All right, let's look at that. Take a look. Okay, so you can see it on the north. Maybe let's add one over here on the east. We'll copy it and we'll paste it. And we'll just say east, name these east. And then we would want to say border layout.east to put it in the east. So we're going to add it there to the east. Recompile it, rerun it, and there you see it in the east. Let's add one to the center. And the center is interesting. It'll fill up whatever is left when we do center. So there's another one. We'll call it center. And center. And then let's recompile, rerun. And now you can see it fills it up. In fact, if you only do center, it'll fill up the whole region. So let me just show you that by commenting out the 2 buttons that are above. Check that out. If you only do center, it's just going to fill it. So center just fills it up if you don't have others. But let's actually do north, east, south, and west as well, just so I can show you those. Put those back in, and we'll include 2 more. So we're going to have south. And we'll name it south. And then we, of course, have to say border layout.south. And then the last one will be west. There we go. Let's see what it looks like. There we go. So we have something in the center. Remember, center would fill up whatever's left. If you start out with west and east, then center will try and fill up as much as it can. But here we've got all 5 of those positions with the border layout. The last one, the card layout, is the most important and also the most challenging of these. So you want to pay some attention. Here you'll notice that we're actually going to save the layout itself for later use because we want to be able to cycle through. So setting up that layout, it takes a couple of steps. You need to say list of cards equals new, because that's what I've called it here. It could be some other name, equals a new card layout. And then we would say set layout list of cards. So before, for the others, you see I just said set layout and then I called it there. But here you need to actually set that up and then set the layout. So kind of a 2-step process here where you need that private field. And then let's add a couple of buttons as we've done before. So I'll steal a couple buttons. And they're going to be right on one on top of the other. So maybe I'll call one top and one bottom. So this is top. And of course, we don't add a second argument that is related to the border layout. But what we can do is we can add a second argument that is an identifier. Well, I'll just call this the first card. So a 1 that's a string. Of course, we're going to call it top. So top, top, top. We add a 1 that's a string, and then this one will be the bottom. Let's say bottom. And maybe we'll just identify this as the string 2. All right. And then what we can do is, let's say we can react to the top or the bottom. So if they hit the top button, again, this one's a little more complicated, so I'm going to go a little further dealing with the action performed. And so if they say top, I can use the list of cards, card layout, and I can say dot show, and I can show a particular card for this panel, and I want to go from top to bottom. So the bottom is 2, so we'll identify that with a 2. So if I hit the top button, it should go to the bottom button because it's going from one to the other using the identifier, the string identifier for that bottom layer. So we'll recompile, we'll rerun. Now if I hit top, it goes to bottom. Now if I hit bottom, there's no reaction, right? I'm kind of stuck on the bottom there, so we'll fix that. Let's do an else if. So else if, and then if it's bottom, I want to be able to go back to the top, and that's identified by the string 1. So we'll say 1. So that way we can go back and forth, and you can imagine, you know, if I add other layers, I might be able to bounce around with these. So, oops, I made a mistake. I logged out there. So let's go back to my starter set. Programming. And I'm looking for my examples. PowerShell. So sorry about that. Okay, so let's try again. So Java C, FourLayouts. FourLayouts, there we go. And now top. Oops, that's the finished one. I want to go into my starter. Try again. I have to compile. Here we go. So I can go from top to bottom to top to bottom. It'll go back and forth because of the code I've got there. Okay, let's make just a couple other layers between the two buttons. Why don't we add a couple panels? So between them, I'm going to say J panel. We'll call it middle 1 equals new J panel. Maybe we'll add a mouse listener. I already have the mouse listener set up here. So we'll say middle 1 dot add mouse listener for this panel. And then we'll add it. We'll say add middle 1. And then we could even have another identifier, maybe a 3 for future use. And I want to be able to distinguish these, so I'm also going to color this. I'm going to say middle 1 dot set background, and we'll say color dot red. And we'll do another one, maybe a fourth one, another middle one in the middle, in between the buttons. So we'll call it middle 2, middle 2, middle 2, middle 2. We'll identify that with a 4. And how about we make that one green? So we just added 2 panels in between the buttons. And there's a mouse listener. I haven't activated any of the mouse methods, but let's see what happens with that. So recompile, rerun, and we'll notice here that it goes from top to bottom to top to bottom, because that's how my action performed is working. It just goes from top to bottom. So what rather than use show, if you just want to cycle through them, if I comment out this code, another way I can move through the cards is to say list of cards, because that's the card layout, dot next for this. And in that way, it'll just cycle to the next card. Whatever card it's on, it goes to the next one. And I would want to do that not only for the button presses, but I would also want to do it for the mouse presses. So that won't go to a particular card. So show will go to a particular card that you identify, but list of cards next this will just go to the next card in the stack. So let's try that. So compile one last time, run it, and now I go from top to the red J panel, to the green J panel, to the bottom, to the top, to the red, to the green, to the etc. This might be useful when we come to creating a game where we can cycle through the cards. So there you got an example for each of these. Again, I want you to type this up, so feel free to go back through the video, type it up, and then I want it turned in to my Google Classroom by the end of the day on Friday. Okay, so thanks very much, and hope to talk to you soon.